The fog. A group of friends was returning from a weekend camping trip in the woods when they met a fog that seemed to engulf the road ahead of them. One of those dense fog kinds that would make the world grey. The rain began as light, then steadied to a point that it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. They were slow, but even moving at a snail's pace, something felt off. The GPS was not showing roads or landmarks, only a blank screen. Then the car came to a stop. With no decision to make left for them, they simply stayed inside and listened as the rain drummed against the roof. Hours ticked by, and the fog seemed to deepen. One by one, the friends grew uneasy, with the feeling that something was watching them from the mist. Suddenly, the fog moving outside the car stopped. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate, moving, swirling. A dark form began to take shape, almost human, but distorted. It moved closer still, and they could hear faint whispers, as if the fog itself was speaking to them. Feeling he could not bear the tension, one of his friends opened the car door and stepped out. In a moment, the shape encompassed him, and he vanished into the fog without a murmur. The others tried to turn the car, but it was dead. The fog rolled in, the shapes multiplying. In the aftermath of the rainstorm, only the car remained, open, empty, its doors swallowed by the endless grey. The gas station in the rain. The last gas station for miles lay in the middle of nowhere. Claire and Jake were heading to a secluded cabin for a weekend, but as the storm worsened, they thought they should stop and put gas in the car. The station looked abandoned with flickering lights and peeling paint, but the pumps worked. Meanwhile, Claire went inside to pay, while Jake filled up the tank. The cashier was an old man with vacant eyes focused on static-ridden television. She paid him and noticed something unusual. On the news broadcast, they were showing them live feed of that particular gas station at which they stood that was some moments ago. The screen showed Claire entering the station, and in the background, Jake was pumping gas. Suddenly the feed changed. Claire saw something terrifying. A figure in a long coat creeping up on Jake from behind. Claire screamed and ran outside, but when she got there, Jake was gone. His car door was wide open, the gas pump still hanging from the tank, but he was nowhere to be seen. The figure on the screen now stood where she was, as if watching her. Muffled by the torrent of rain drumming harder, it cut out all other sounds. She turned around and there, just beyond the car, it did stand still, waiting. The hitchhiker. The day was cold, and it was raining, and an interminable road stretched endlessly ahead. For hours, Jason had been driving, but the growing exhaustion battling against the drumming rain did not help. His headlamps continued cutting through the thick fog, but still only served to barely reveal the lonely and barrenest stretch of the road ahead. He hadn't seen another car for miles, when, without any warning, a figure stood at the edge of the road. The man was drenched, shivering in the rain, his thumb thrust out. Almost involuntarily, Jason pulled over to the roadside. A figure slipped into the car with no more noise than the swish of a curtain and slid into the passenger seat, his face nothing more than a dark shadow within the interior of the car. Jason made some small talk. Nothing issued from the man. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. Time passed, and Jason hardly noticed what he saw in the rear view. In the rear view, he could see the man's face. It was pale and cold and resembled lifeless clay. His eyes were empty holes. As soon as Jason glanced over, the man looked fine. Panic hit. The air inside the car became freezing as the man started whispering and narrating all of Jason's life. his secrets and failures. Jason slammed on the brakes. He needed to turn the whole way around to confront him. But when he did that, the seat across him was still clear. The door was still locked. The man had gone, but his whispers remained in the rain, echoing Jason's deepest terrors. When Jason shot off in terror, his car crashed into a tree some miles down the road. And there, standing in the rain beside the wreckage, was the hitchhiker. The farmhouse. Julie and Mark were completely lost. It must have taken a wrong turn somewhere during their road trip, and there they were, miles into nowhere with no reception and the rain coming down in sheets. They caught sight of a dim light in the distance and knew it was an old farmhouse. It was neglected, yet irresistibly inviting, as if it's their only hope for shelter. Before they had barely knocked, the door creaked open, and they were able to catch a glimpse of a dusty, dimly lit interior. They called out, but no one replied. The place seemed long abandoned. They settled into the living room to wait out the storm. It is not long before strange things begin to happen to them. Mark notices muddy footprints going out and back in through the house, and he realizes that they hadn't made them. Julie swore she had seen movements out of the corner of her eyes, but whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there. There was suddenly this loud bang from upstairs. Mark grabbed a flashlight and headed to check it out while Julie waited downstairs. There were a few minutes of eerie silence before Julie heard Mark's voice calling for her up there. She went up the stairs and couldn't find Mark anywhere. She approached a dusty mirror. Behind her, she saw Mark standing, his eyes wide with some nameless terror. Turning, she didn't find him. He had vanished. Instead, she saw the faint outline of a family. Parents and 2 children staring out of the darkness. The storm had grown louder outside, and the figures in the mirror began their lurching approach toward her. Julie ran only to realize that front door was now locked to her. She could hear Mark's voice again now, far away and pleading, but it came from the back of the mirror.